Good day everyone. So for today, we'll be discussing about the difference between qualitative research and quantitative research. So let's recall our previous discussion wherein we described several methods for quantitative research wherein we can do mathematical modeling, empirical research, and experimental research. While for qualitative, we can do a document review, we can also do a content analysis, for example, analyzing a video content, and we can also do observation, for example, observing communities and their interactions with the animals. And then, for example, we can also do an in-depth interview with a person with a unique case, and then we can also do a focus group studies and case studies. So for our lesson for today, we will be discussing about the difference between quantitative research and qualitative research in terms of its research goals or objectives, data analysis, outcomes from the data analysis, reliability, and of course, validity. And with that, let's start with our lesson for today. So for the research goals and objectives, in quantitative research, its goal is to quantify, while in qualitative, its goal is mainly to test, describe, explain, and explore variables. In quantitative, we want to quantify variables through numbers, while in qualitative, we describe variables through words. So let's use these variables as an example. Let's use, for example, patterns of behavior. If we want to do a quantitative research and quantify patterns of behavior, we can use graphs or other statistical tools so that we can quantify the patterns of behavior and describe how it moves up and down. So for example, we can do a quantitative research on the price of gas and its patterns of behavior in terms of its increasing price and decreasing price every week. So we can do that. And for qualitative, if we want to do a research in the prices of gas, we can interview jeepney drivers or tricycle drivers so that we can describe more on the experience and perspectives of jeepney drivers, or rather than focusing on the object itself, like for example, rather than focusing on the price of gas as an object, in qualitative research, we want to inquire and to describe the price of gas through the perspective and experience of the people. So that's why we are going to interview jeepney drivers and tricycle drivers who experience the rising and falling of the price of gas. Next one, if we want to do a research about the interactions, for example, interactions between friends, families during the pandemic. So if we want to do a quantitative research wherein we quantify, what we will do is, for example, we want to measure the frequency or quantify the frequency of how often they interacted in the span of a week. So that's for quantitative research. Now, if we want to research on the interactions between family and friends during the pandemic and you want to do a qualitative research, what we will do is we want to describe or explore the quality of interaction. So rather than the frequency, we focus on the quality of the interaction. Do they for example, bonding moments, and how enjoyable are the bonding moments for friends and families during the pandemic. And that's how qualitative research, or the goals of qualitative research and quantitative research, differs from each other. So again, qualitative research focuses on the quality, while quantitative research focuses on the quantity or the frequency of the variables involved. And ultimately, it boils down to what kind of research question you are going to ask. Because if you ask a question that requires a number for an answer or for a data, then you will have to do a quantitative research. Where if you ask a research question that has something to do or that can be answered through words or descriptions, then you can do a qualitative research. Next one, let's move on to data analysis. So if you have a research goal or objective, once you completed your goal or your objective, and you have already gathered data. For example, you've gathered numerical data, and you've gathered descriptive data. And then the next step that you will do is data analysis. Now, for quantitative research, the data analysis is a statistical analysis wherein you have statistical tools, you have mathematical formulas that can treat your data so that it generalizes the numbers and represents the population, a percentage of the population. So that's statistical analysis for quantitative research. For qualitative research, it's not, you won't do a statistical analysis, but rather a thematic analysis. So rather than using mathematical formulas, what you will do is you will pick out necessary words or descriptions based on the context of your research question. And then after that, once you pick out the words and descriptions, you will organize it into categories and form the main themes of your data, and then these themes should answer your research question. And the next one, after you have analyzed your data, then we will now compare the outcome of a quantitative research and a qualitative research. So for the outcome of a quantitative research, it is population based, meaning the quantitative research usually generalizes a population. So your data is usually a representative of a population. So for example, 70% of Filipinos prefer brand X over brand Y, something like that. So that's an example of quantitative research. While for qualitative research, it is not generalizable, meaning it does not represent the population, but rather the experience of the people or the participants who are involved in your research. So for example, your research focuses on indigenous people and their perspective on education. So they do not represent the entire Filipino population, but rather your research gets to highlight the perspective of those who are a portion of a population with regards to their perspective on education, and that is qualitative research. That's the outcome of a qualitative research. The important part in qualitative research is that you get to highlight their perspective, and then you get to formally document their views, and you give them a voice to be heard by the authorities and policymakers. And with that, let's move on to how the reliability or the basis for reliability of quantitative research and qualitative research differs from each other. So quantitative research mainly relies on instruments, since it wants to quantify or measure variables. It needs measuring instruments. For example, thermometer, for example, clocks or timer, protractor, or voltameter. So those are instruments, and the reliability of the data heavily relies on the instruments. While in qualitative research, the reliability of its data relies on people's inferences, meaning it relies on how each individual researcher interprets their data. So, for example, you want to research about the height, or you want to compare the height of two students, and then for quantitative research, you will measure the height in terms of a meter stick. And for qualitative research, the basis for its reliability uses people as instruments. So meaning, it relies on the inferences of person A from this point, and then it also relies on the point of view of person B, and then the point of view of person C. So that's how qualitative research gather their data. It mainly uses people's inferences as instruments. But of course, you won't be using qualitative approach to measure height. That's primarily already quantitative since height is a numerical variable. But for example, if you want to measure or to describe the pains of childbirth, so instead, you can measure it through a pain scale. Like, for example, on a scale of 1 to 10, how painful is childbirth? And that's quantitative method because you will quantify the pain. Then you can also use qualitative approach so that you can interview people on their actual experiences and perspective on how they experience childbirth from their point of view. So that's one of the advantages naman ng qualitative research. And with regards to that, let's move on to the validity of the data coming from those instruments. So for validity, quantitative research validates through statistical values. So for example, you measured height and then there are 3 measures. So measurement 1, measurement 2, measurement 3. So you can validate the accuracy or the precision of the measurement by computing its average. And that's how you validate the quantitative data. And then for qualitative, you can validate your data through cross-checking. So for example, since qualitative data relies on people's inferences, person 1 and person 2 and person 3 can cross-check their inferences with each other so that they can find out the possible biases and call out each other. And with that, the qualitative data is validated. So to further highlight the difference between qualitative and quantitative, let's review your P-task number 1. So in your P-task number 1, you were tasked to collate or collect data about your FB stories or FB memories and analyze its content. So for qualitative, you describe each picture and then organized those pictures into categories and then build themes from those stories, and then you described your themes or described your findings through an essay. And then for quantitative, if you want to do a quantitative research about your 2021 pandemic stories through FB stories content analysis, then what you will have to do is to tally your FB stories. So for example, your result would be about the percentage of your FB stories that mentions about cooking. So for example, 50% of my FB stories are about cooking. Rather than in qualitative description, I tried making this pizza with my brother. So my category is making food and developing skills. So that's the difference between qualitative and quantitative. And another one, for example, in quantitative, 30% of my FB stories are about my friends. As compared to qualitative data or qualitative findings wherein in February 2021, I went out with friends. And so a portion of my 2021 story is about maintaining or building relationships. So those are the main differences of qualitative and quantitative research. Now, for your next activity, let's have a comment discussion or recitation. Comment down below your answers. Which research method do you prefer? Is it qualitative or quantitative? Comment down below and explain the reasons why you chose your preferred research method. And that's the end of our lesson for today.